I certainly want to thank you and all the folks at SSATB, Heather Hurl and Amy Gruber and others who have worked to create a great partnership between SSATB and the Independent Educational Consultants Association. I want to thank everybody out there who's tuning in. I know it's such a busy time of year for all of you, and when you add to that, I know there's a global symposium and small boarding conference and all this other stuff going on. So special thanks for everyone who is tuning in, and I hope that I'll give you some insights and some secret information that I don't normally share as part of my appreciation for your being here. I was just saying to Karen that there have been such significant changes to the world of independent consulting in the last few years. I mean, literally just the last couple of years. And I have to say that in my opinion, most of the boarding school admissions folks and the day school admission folks haven't adjusted to the way the field has changed. So what I'd like to do over the course of this webinar is to make sure we cover a handful of things. First of all, I want to talk about how IECA has changed, how this association, how its focus, how numbers, how all sorts of things have changed, even where our members are has undergone a dramatic change. I also want to look at the practice of consulting, how consultants do their job differently today than they used to do their job. And part of that is how the clients have changed. There's been a pretty significant shift in who are the client base of educational consultants. I also want to talk about how those changes impact school admission and how schools can maximize their efforts in working with IECs, independent educational consultants. And in fact, we'll finish today. The last thing I'll do, I'm going to go through what I consider the top 10 things that school admission representatives should be doing. And you'll notice I want to make sure that we talk about LD, international, traditional, and non-traditional students. All of that I hope to cover over the course of the time that we spend together. I'm going to start off with a couple of numbers. So if you were to go back just to the year 2000, in that year, 72% of IECA members, so most IECA members, most educational consultants in America were doing school advising. That number has fallen to 32% today. So we went from almost 3/4 of members to only 1/3. Where are most consultants today? The majority of consultants today, over 80% of consultants, work in college placements. Now, if you take 80% and you see the 32% that's up there, you can tell that there are a number of consultants who do more than one thing. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later on as well. The other, just to show you how significantly things have changed, back in 2000, 35% of members they may have done many things, but they were primarily working in school placements. Today, it's only 11%. 1 out of 9 members works in that area. And I know that that sounds like really bad news, but if you sum it up, the percentage of educational consultants working in school placements is down 55% since the year 2000. Now, it looks a little strange on your screen where I point out that that's actually really good news. And I know it doesn't seem like it, but I want to explain how I believe that's actually a pretty good bit of information. So let's look at it from the other direction. That same year we were talking about, in 2000, we had 230 members of IECA. That meant, with 72% doing school advising, there were 166 total school consultants in America. And about 81 consultants, that's primarily what they did, was school consulting. Today, IECA has over 1,100 members in our association. I think the number as of this morning is about 1,104, and we are adding them consultants right now at the rate of about 3 to 4 a week. While only 32% do school advising, the total number helping families with school placements, 352. And even the number who do schools as their primary focus, it's 121. So basically, although it's a smaller piece of the pie, it's a much bigger pie. There are so many more people doing consulting in America, so many more people using consultants. Even just since the beginning of this year, since January, we've added 20 consultants whose focus is on school advising. So, bottom line, today, twice as many educational consultants working in school placements than just a few years ago. I also want to point out that I think an important clarification of some terminology, and that is what we mean by school consulting. If you were to ask me even 6, 7 years ago, what do we really mean by school consulting, I would have said it meant traditional grades 9 to 12 boarding schools. That's no longer the case. When I use school consulting today, I am talking about traditional boarding and junior boarding. I'm talking about independent day schools, public charter, public magnet schools. I'm talking about schools with extensive LD services as well as LD schools, and we're even talking about a 13th year gap year programs as well. So we've expanded the definition because the demand from parents has really changed. And what I mean is, the phone calls I used to get here in the IECA office, if we took a phone call, a few years ago, a parent would say, I'm interested in looking at a boarding school for my son or daughter. Or my son or daughter is acting out and I think we need to send them to a live-away school, even if they didn't know what a prep school was and they didn't know the difference between therapeutic boarding school and regular boarding school. Well, that's just not the kinds of phone calls we get anymore. Today, here's what we're more likely to hear is something isn't right. My daughter's just not doing well. She doesn't seem to be happy in school. Things are off on the wrong track. She's bored. Maybe there's something else going on. And what they say to us are simply, really, hey, something's broken. I need some help to figure out how to help my daughter, how to help my son. So whereas a few years ago, the consultant would have immediately looked at boarding school solutions, today it's much more likely that parents want to look at the whole range, the whole array of possibilities that are open to them. What I think is really exciting is it means that parents who have never thought about independent education, they've never thought about private schooling at all, are suddenly brought into the marketplace. And all of the assumptions they've made about what private school is all about can be dealt with by a consultant early on in a conversation. Let's clarify what a boarding school is like. Let's talk to you about what an independent day school looks like. How does it differ from the public school? So suddenly we have the ability to introduce all this information early on in the process to a family that wouldn't have called a consultant 5 years ago because they weren't looking for a boarding school. Keep in mind that part of this discussion also often leads to other directions. It may lead to LD testing. It may lead to looking whether there are emotional disabilities involved. The one thing we know is that when students aren't doing well in school, there are parents who get very, very involved, and those are the parents who look for alternatives, the most involved parents. Well, now I want you to think about if you were an educational consultant. And you're an educational consultant. Back in the old days, you worked only in boarding schools. Well, you may have only worked with about 150 schools where you had to do a campus visit and develop a personal relationship with the admissions staff and conduct what other sorts of research needed to be done. But that was your world that you had to look at. Now, the same consultant may have to look at 150 boarding schools, but another 20 or 40 or 50 day schools. They may have to be looking at another 20 or 30 public schools that have magnet programs. not counting the consultants that are also doing college, doing therapeutic work, looking at LD programs. We now estimate that the average consultant is trying to keep information straight on 700 different institutions. So it is a heck of a lot more work than it used to be a really good consultant. And in fact, one of the reasons for that is we've used the term a good match, a good fit for many, many years. And when it comes to schools, what we used to mean was two prongs. We want to make sure it's the right place academically, and we wanted to make sure it was the right place socially, that the student fit in and felt like she belonged. Well, you know, we now live in a world where every parent thinks their child is completely unique, that there's something special and individualized. And so consultants have to look into all those aspects of the kid. So when we used to say it was academics and social, now we're looking at kids that do excel in athletics and art, maybe in science. We are looking at autism spectrum disorders. We're looking at whether there's anxiety and depression issues. Are there family issues that need to be dealt with? ADD or ADHD issues have to be considered. We look at learning style. Most consultants in America today are doing a version of the Myers-Briggs to get an MBTI index on these kids because they want to know, are these kids, are they outgoing? Are they reserved? Are they kids that will thrive in a competitive environment, or a kid who will sort of give up in a competitive environment and they need sort of a warm, supportive environment? They also want to look at things like intellectual curiosity. Is this a kid who loves writing or loves reading, or both? As well as those sort of community and spiritual needs that a student may bring into the process. So it is, there is so much more involved, I think, in the decision making than there used to be. And let me even say, I think there was a time early on in IECA's existence where consultants would just call up an admission director and say, hey, buddy, you have an empty bed in your school. Well, those consultants that do that, I think that's the old way of doing things. Things have really changed, and now consultants are much more likely to look at all these circumstances and conditions that relate to kids to try to figure out how to really pull together the right match. And one of the key things that I'm going to ask you to do when I go through my 10 things that I would love for you all to be working on is to really be thinking about, how do I help the consultant to know that it's the right match? That's a major key that we'll talk about soon. I do want to talk just a little bit more sort of about numbers and demographics and how things have changed, because I said I want to talk about how consultants have changed. Well, clearly, there are more educational consultants than we've ever had before. They are each placing more students overall, but fewer students in schools. And I would even go so far as to say that there was a point in time, maybe when I first came to IECA 20 years ago, that 90% of school placements were handled by just 15 different consultants. They were the source of almost all students. That is simply not true anymore. It is simply more diffuse. There are now 350 consultants doing school placements, but each may only be placing 5, 6, or 10 a year. I think when we looked at the average was 14, those that are doing school placements. That's how many school kids they were helping to work on a placement. So we don't have the one firm that's placing, 170 kids, which used to dominate back in the old days, meaning 7, 8 years ago. Newer ed consultants are spending more time, taking more care in placing students, and looking at that broader range of options. By the way, I should add with this, I mentioned very briefly sort of the therapeutic side of this. There was a time about 10 years ago where therapeutic consulting had grown very, very large, probably had become bigger than school consulting. That is no longer the case. there's been a pretty significant drop-off in the number of people working on the therapeutic side of the school number, and many, many more consultants working in the more traditional area of non-therapeutic school placements. And if anyone wants more information, I can share that later. Well, I want to give an image of what the consultant looked like 20 years ago. And for those of you that have been in admissions for even 10 or 15 years, this is probably what you were basically told, that these educational consultants were sort of kitchen table professionals. They were people, they were in sole practice, they worked all by themselves. They probably were female in their 70s or 80s. They were married to a spouse who was very successful in law or medicine or some other professional field, and they sort of did this almost as an avocation. It was something to do. Even those that were really great at it, it still was sort of one of the foci of their life. It wasn't the sole focus of what they were doing. Well, that is so different today. Increasingly, educational consultants, it's their first or second career. The average member that we're adding today is in their 30s. They're joining us by midlife. They really view themselves as professionals. They've embraced the role that they're also entrepreneurs because they're trying to make a living at this, that they are now supporting families. They are paying staff, and I'll point it out in a minute how much more of that there is going on. Much stricter ethics rules are in place than before. You know, if I were to say back about 10 years ago, I would hear schools, they would call me up and say, Mark, you know, some of these consultants, it's all about getting a trip to come out and visit me during ski season, or it's, you know, sending a big fruit basket at Christmas. Those days are gone, in part because our ethics rules say that you can no longer do some of those things. But more than that, it's because consultants today, they have higher expectations. They know they're being watched. They're working in formal business arrangements with contracts, and they need to be doing things in a much more professional way than they did. Even consider 10 years ago, over half of our members were only working part-time. Even if it was their only job, they were working an average of 20 to 25 hours a week. Today, 67% of our members are full-time or more. That's because nearly a third, about 28%, so somewhere between a quarter and a third, work more than 50 hours a week. So very different than the way that it was.
Mark?
Another change, that if you went back, yes?
Could I just pop in here? I'm sorry for interrupting,
please.
but we've had several questions about therapeutic consultants.
Okay.
Peter Newman's wondering why there are fewer therapeutic consultants now. And Jessica Whitlow is asking, she says she's interested in hearing more about therapeutic school placement numbers versus traditional, as referenced in that slide that you just had.
So I'll say a little bit now, and I'll work more into it as I go through. You know, the field of therapeutic consulting has really changed. One, it's become much more complicated. You know, we used to say a kid was referred for therapeutic advising if maybe there was a substance abuse issue. Well, today, some more traditional consultants are willing to handle a kid that has a substance abuse issue in their past. But these kids are so much more likely to see these comorbid situations where there's a learning disability together with a substance abuse problem, together with an oppositional or defiant behavior that's going on in the family and a dysfunctional home. They have become so complicated that unless you really are willing to focus almost all your energy on the therapeutic side, that it's impossible to sort of dabble in therapeutic anymore. You've got to really be committed, constantly educating yourself, constantly visiting programs. And there's been a shift in the programs themselves from almost all were mom and pop individually owned to now these therapeutic schools are largely owned by huge conglomerates, multinational corporations who own hospitals as well as therapeutic programs. And so keeping up with those changes, although we have, and plus let's mention the expense, which is just absolutely extraordinary in some of these therapeutic placements. The number of kids going to therapeutic placements have declined a little bit, but what's happened really in the field of ed consultants is unless you're going to do only that, and we now have established higher standards. If you want to call yourself a therapeutic consultant, you go through some additional hoops that you have to jump through. So it's a much more complicated process, therefore fewer consultants are working in that area. And as we go through, I'll try to work in a little more on the therapeutic side as well. But let me go to a couple of the other demographic changes that you see on your screen. Most people tell me that they think IECA is primarily a northeastern organization, that our members are mostly New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, some Rhode Island up through Maine, maybe as far south as Washington, D.C., and work primarily for wealthy families. So a lot of admissions people say to me, well, they're the full-paying community. That's the folks that I go to consultants for. Well, now let's jump ahead to the modern era in the association. For us, California is the most populous state, and it is by far. Most of our members work for professional or middle-class, upper-middle-class families, representing much more diverse communities. And we have members now in virtually all states. I think we have members now in 44, 45 states. So members are much more likely to be working with people in rural areas and in other communities that in the past have been underserved and underrepresented on your campuses. So again, it's a great way to find, the kid from a rural community in Iowa. They're going to find you not because they think, ooh, private school, let me go look online and see what I find, but more likely it's a consultant who says to a family, have you ever thought about options in independent schooling? Another change, again, go back a decade or so, we only had a dozen members of IECA outside of the United States. They were almost exclusively Korea and Japan. And even those that we said, if you saw making air quotes with my fingers, those that we said were in Europe were really American-based. They were here in the States, but had an office in Germany or had an office in Switzerland. Today, 25%, a quarter of our new members are international. We now have members on every continent. Fastest growing areas for us are you can see there, China, the Middle East, and South America. But it's so important to make sure that people know when we talk about international educational consultants, the difference between us and agents. And agents have been getting a black eye in recent years. I have to admit I may have swung a couple of those punches that gave them a black eye. To make sure everyone knows the difference as we describe it, agents are given a kickback from the school in exchange for students that are referred. Educational consultants are precluded from ever taking money from a school, college, or program in exchange for placing a student. They cannot do that. They are working solely for the student. They have no monetary benefit for sending student to one place over another. So I just want to make sure that was clear. So just real fast, as an example to show you where we've got people in Europe today, I was a little liberal in just deciding to include a couple of countries in Europe that are sort of on the border with Asia. But you'll see, and we now have members from 23 countries, China being the largest of those. And we probably right now have another 10 or 15 applications from somewhere in the world waiting to be reviewed. It takes us much, much longer to go through an application from abroad. We're just so careful to make sure that somebody is not taking those kickbacks and is working solely for the family that's involved. I'm going to say a couple more things about demographics, and then we can move on to some ideas on what you could or should be doing. Going back again, just a little while ago, most of our members were sole practitioners. As recently as 3 years ago, a majority of our members were working completely on their own, and 99% were in private practice. And in fact, we used to define that an educational consultant was somebody who worked in private practice. It used to be part of the definition. It no longer is because of a couple of these trends. Today, most educational consultants, the majority, work in a practice with at least 2 people. Sometimes that means somebody is the school person, somebody does colleges, somebody works in therapeutic. Sometimes it means that somebody is an expert in student athletes or somebody else is the LD expert. But these larger practices are the norm today. One of the most exciting changes for me is to see the delivery of services through nonprofit organizations. That's actual consultants who establish themselves as not-for-profit organizations, or community-based organizations. As counseling services in schools and communities is reduced, either because of a lack of tax revenue or other reasons that there are cutbacks, community-based organizations like Girl Scouts of America, like Boys and Girls Clubs, and like Jack and Jill are stepping up and beginning to deliver educational consulting services. And so a number of our members, and we think it's going to become a very significant part of who educational consultants are, will be people working through these community-based organizations or nonprofits. And the last piece is that about 1/4 of our members now are ethnic or racial minorities. So it's exciting to see that kind of change occur, because what we believe is as our membership changes to better reflect America's diversity, the students that they are working with will be as well. But here's something that we need to give a little warning about, is that many of you may use the online IECA database or may use our print directory thinking that that's our list of members. Well, if you were to go in there and count right now, you'd end up with about 500. Over half of our members are not listed in that directory. And the reason is we only list professional members. Professional members are people with a master's degree or other advanced learning, people with 3 references, at least 3 years of experience. They've worked with at least 30-some clients. We do reference checks with those clients. We do reference checks with admission directors to make sure kids were appropriately placed. They have to visit at least 50 campuses. So there's a lot to become a professional member. And if we're going to make a referral to a family who says we need somebody we can trust to help us with this process, we can only refer to professional members. But you, as an admissions director, should be giving half of your time, at least, to those associate members and student members. Associate members aren't on the website, they're not in the directory, but they are members of the association who are working to meet those higher standards to be a professional member. So it's usually the first 2 to 3 years of their work as a consultant. We can't refer families to them, but we want to refer you to them. How do you get that list? Well, you contact the IECA office and say, can I please get a complete list of your associate members? We will get them to you. You should be reaching out to them absolutely unequivocally. Student members, as of a year ago, we only had about 8 or 9 student members in the association. Today it's closer to 30. And those are people who are not yet practicing. And this is part of that change that I said. We're now seeing younger people coming into the field. So these are people first career, are in school learning to be an educational consultant but aren't practicing yet. And we invite them to come as student members. They are just deciding how they want to practice. And I think reaching them about schools and understanding independent education will be a great benefit to them. So I'm going to move on to the best ways that I can think of to work with an ed consultant, unless I'll just see if you have any question, Karen, that I should answer before I move on to those suggestions.
Yeah, I think this one pretty much speaks to the demographics that you were just providing. Mary Lou Prim is asking, any idea what percentage of IECA consultants are former admission directors?
Yeah, you know, it is a fair percentage. I think we all know some people that left the admissions office and came into educational consulting. Of those that do school, I'll bet it's about a third. I'll bet a third in some other way. Part of their life was spent either in an independent school, or they went to a private school, or their kids are in a boarding school, that they have some other connection. But you know, one of the fastest growing professions of people heading into educational consulting are people in the legal field. We have so many lawyers in the association today, and what happens is you have a lawyer who does some youth advocacy work, and they are just smitten by the ability to really impact a kid's life. And so if you can get off the corporate treadmill and do something that's so self-affirming by helping kids to really succeed. So we increasingly see people come. We generally talk about people with traditional paths, that is, they were counselors or admission people, and non-traditional paths into the field. And today it's probably 50-50. Probably half of the folks entering educational consulting are taking a non-traditional path into the field. So I'm going to move on, and let me talk about my top 10 things on working with ed consultants. Well, again, I said that there used to be that you could say that there were 15 or 20 consultants in the country that did most of the school placements. And when I would talk to school admission reps, they could say when they went to a conference or people they wanted to be in touch with, they would name the same 20 people. And that's what it was all about for them. If I can see those 20 people, I'm in great shape. If not, it was worthless for me to go to a conference or to connect in other ways. So my advice is to think about the fact that there are more than 300 consultants in our association today working in schools. Yes, they may each be doing fewer, but casting that wider net, finding all of those consultants out there, and think of all the consultants out there that just don't know you and your school, and a chance to really get them information. Consider even, I would bet some of you out there, I don't know how many, are going to join us at our next conference in Chicago or the one that follows in San Diego. Already registered for Chicago, and we're still a month away. We have 126 school-based consultants, school consultants. So your goal should be to get that list ahead of time, which we email to folks, find out who is going to be there, and figure out ways to connect. And you'll see I'm going to mention this again in a minute in a different context. But your goal shouldn't be not just the handful of really big firms, but find especially these younger consultants who need to learn who you are. So casting that wider net. And that includes reaching out to the new members in IECA. Half of our members are associates. It is a requirement for them. Remember, they all want to become professional members so they can be listed on the website. Every one of them wants to become a professional member. They have to do a minimum number of visits. They have to have worked with a certain number of schools. They need school admission people to do letters of reference for them. So they want to connect. And very often what I hear from them is that they're ignored, that admission directors will either at an IECA conference or they'll hear from IECA members that they've been getting a copy of your school newspaper or your literary magazine, or they're invited to visit campus. And these newer people, these associate members, say, I didn't get any of that. This school is totally ignoring me. They must not want to work with me. Well, I think we both know you'd love to work with them, but it's getting their names and making that effort. So it does mean connecting in a different way. If you were only going to connect with 20 consultants, you can call them all on the phone, you can visit them in their office, you can invite them to campus. If you're trying to connect with 300, you need to be thinking of other ways, and we'll get there in a second. I'll give you some information. But I'll give you one quick way of connecting with newer members. Every school admission person out there should be a subscriber to Insights. It's our newsletter that comes out every other month. It's free. 5,500 people get that newsletter. In it, we list the new members. If you just look, the current issue, the one that came out in February, it lists a total of 8 new members, I think, 4 of whom do school. How easy it is for you when you get that insight to throw a quick note with a packet of material in the mail and say, see, you just became a new member of IECA, you work in school placements, here's some information, I would love to talk with you when you have a chance. These newer folks have fewer clients, they've got more time, they know they're investing in education, and they're going to be willing to take some time. But that's every other month, a new group of ed consultants, and you look for them to show that S listing. The third thing is to understand the new professional aspect of membership. When I went to IECA conferences when I first started, some of you know the story. I was hired by IECA, and within a couple of days I went to my first conference. And I stood and watched all this hugging and backslapping that went on. I mean, it was everybody was kissing everybody, and everybody was buddy with everyone else. And I called my wife back in the day. You had to go to a payphone. I called my wife and I said, oh no, I think this is a cult. Because of sort of, it looked like it was all about just being buddies with somebody, and I'll send you kids because you're my friend. Well, I understand the importance of personal relationships, but today it's much more about facts, figures, statistics. Demonstrate to me what your school's all about. If you want me to refer kids, I need to really understand who you are and what you do. It's not about that other stuff about being buddies. It really is about getting me the information I need to make a great match. Number 4, remember I said that one of the things that we've noticed is a dramatic difference is that our members are now working with families that aren't already thinking about a private school education. So all of you have a responsibility to help our members understand and fully comprehend the benefits of independent education. And whether you're representing a country day school, or you're representing America's most exclusive prep school, or you're representing a school that's more of a regional entity, you know, your job is to try to explain the role that your school plays in the education marketplace. What is it that makes you valuable and unique? They'll help pitch that to the family. The job of the consultant is to make sure families understand the differences there, and they want to help do that with you. They want to be your partner in that process. Number 5, I think, may be the most important. I'm not sure why I buried it as number 5. You have to get accurate information into the hands of consultants. Consultants are looking for that aha moment where they work with a kid, they listen to a family, and they say, man, I know just the right place for you. You know, maybe it's something unusual. It's a boy that plays ice hockey but really wants to sing in the school musical. And in the local public school, you can't do both of those. And so this is a family that's thinking, great, I have a kid who's really into STEM, he's really a science and technology kid, but he wants to sing in the school musical and play ice hockey. You need to make sure that consultants have all of the information possible. And you have to, and this is tough for some of you, you have to let consultants know what your strengths are, but just as importantly, what your weaknesses are. Who do you serve well? And let me go a little bit more into this. You know, I have to tell you, some of you have heard me say before, man, do I hate that funnel analogy. I get it, that on your website and in your print materials, the goal is to cast this wide end, as many kids as possible find their way into this admission funnel, and then you work with that group in the funnel and you figure out who's really appropriate, and in the end you get a couple of drops out the bottom that represent kids that are just perfect. And you can do that by being very general. Well, here you have to be willing to think of consultants differently. And I'm going to tell you something. This is the best analogy I could think of. I took a mixology class just for the fun of it. I'm not really a big drinker, but it just seemed like a lot of fun. So I took a mixology class. And the first drink we were going to make was a blueberry lemon drop. And what I loved about this when I looked at the finished product was there was the lemon on the top, the lemon martini on top, and that beautiful blue sitting at the bottom. It was complete strata, that separate, and there was the blue at the bottom. My assumption was you pour the blue in the top. I think we actually used palm, but you pour it at the top, and somehow it settled at the bottom. Well, think of that martini glass as your funnel. No, if you pour that at the top, it gets diluted into the overall drink. The way you get that nice little blue spot at the bottom, you put a straw into the palm juice, put your finger over the top so you hold it in, you lower to the very bottom, and slowly you let it out in the martini glass, and there it sits at the very bottom. That's what the consultant is supposed to do for you, is to not take a kid who's part of that big group at the top, but if you give them great information, they should be able to pinpoint the right kid for you. So you're not looking for a kid at the top of the funnel, you're looking for the perfect spot that should be at the bottom of the funnel. So you don't want to be making comments. Your website might say what I've written here, great school for smart kids that aren't living up to their potential. You don't want to use that with an educational consultant. It's worthless. A consultant wants to know what kind of kid is successful here, what kind of kid tends not to be successful. They want to get you just the right kid for the bottom of the funnel. Now, having said that, I will get calls from schools who will say to me, that there's a consultant, and they'll say consultant X always sends me the wrong kid. It's always the wrong kid, not the right kid for me. Well, I hate to say this, my response is shame on you, because somehow this consultant has an image of your school that isn't correct. Your job is to fix that, to make it correct, make sure that they know who you are. And that means be prepared to explain when changes take place. I know that boards get involved now and then, and a board says, let's raise our standards. A board says, we're seeing too many international kids. We're seeing too many kids with LD. We want this. We want that. That things change. But if your admissions office is told, here's our focus for next year, you should be telling that to educational consultants. You want them to understand changes. If not, they're going to send you the kind of kid they sent you last year and the year before and the year before that, because they won't appreciate the fact that things have really changed. Again, it's all about helping them find that great fit. For so many consultants, it's getting that information, and although visiting their office for some people works and emails might work and phone calls, many of you know that campus visits is really important. A quick word to folks in day schools. There's a day school admission director here in the DC area that does something so smart. Wednesday is her educational consultant day, and every Wednesday this person has a different educational consultant to school for lunch, eating in the cafeteria so that they can see in the dining hall how the kids interact, get a feel for the school. But every Wednesday it's somebody different coming to visit their school. Now, that's not a system that will work for everybody, but helping consultants to get to your campus, or I'm going to give you advice that I give to consultants. Consultants ask me that given new technologies, what's the best way to communicate with parents? And my answer is how the parent wants to be communicated with. The best thing you could do with a consultant is to say, do you prefer I email you? Do you prefer to get material sent to you? Would it be worthwhile for me to come to your office, or would you prefer that I leave you alone? And let the consultant sort of dictate to you. But getting consultants to campus, and a quick word about those campus visits. Ideally, consultants to be out of their community, they'll do their own travel, but they want to visit a number of campuses in the same visit. So if there can be an opportunity to visit 3 or 4 or 5 campuses over 3 or 4 days, that's much better. While they're there, they want to meet with senior staff. They don't want to meet with the newest admission person. They really do want to meet with the senior admissions person. Remember, this consultant may have been on your campus 5 times, already, yet that new admission staff member has barely been there for 3 or 4 months. They also would love to meet with a senior faculty person if it's possible, if somebody's free, or sit in on a class for 20 minutes to get a sense of what a class is like. They want to see students. So they also, though, need a little time to connect with their office. And if you don't give it to them, they're going to start pulling out cell phones, so giving them a little bit of time. I would say 99% of consultants don't want to be taken out for a fancy meal, don't want to be in the head's residence for dinner at night. They want to have a meal in the dining hall. They really do want to see what kids are doing, and they want you to show them. Don't just show them what a dorm room looks like. We all know what dorm rooms look like. Show them what makes you unique. If you have an amazing arts pavilion, take them there. If not, no need. No need to show them a gym if it's a standard gym that isn't at all unique. So there's that, and also be ready to explain sort of academic support services. And I know time's running, so I'm going to try to real quick get through 8 through 10. Number 8 goes to the people who say to me, I was at my table at an IECA conference, or I was at an SSATB conference, and I barely got to see any educational consultants. Well, get out from behind your table at the fair, start calling consultants, make plans to have a cup of coffee in the morning, make plans to see them, to sit with them at lunch, find them while you're there. There are going to be, again, in Chicago, 126 consultants are there that do schools. You need to invite them, encourage them to join you, ask them to find time, whether it's a cup of coffee or it's at the IECA big dinner, the opening night, where you agree that you're going to take your tickets and you're going to share a glass of wine together, maybe go to a corner of the room somewhere. You've got to make those opportunities happen with consultants. Number 9, you've got to keep an IECA member updated on their students' progress if they're placed in your school. It is critical. Most consultants, and not everyone knows this, most consultants tell their parents that they're part of the team. They're going to make sure that a student's doing well. It is so horrific for a consultant to find out second or third hand that a student has been asked to leave a school without looping them in. In almost every case, a release form is signed by the parent when they're working with the consultant to allow you to look at a student's, to allow you to share a student's academic work with the consultant. Those of you that are working in the therapeutic world, it is critically important that the consultants stay in the loop, because there's probably going to be some outplacement that's done, maybe 2 or 3 times. It is critical for the consultant to know how the student is doing, both in terms of their academic work, but in terms of their social and their emotional well-being. Let them know success stories as well. I have to tell you, if you were to call a consultant and say, just want you to know, we were a little worried about how Johnny was going to do because the other kids are so much bigger than he is. I want you to know he has found his niche. He's doing great, and just recently was elected, vice president of his dorm. How great for the consultant to be able to call the family and share that information as well. We know that you want to share the information, but how exciting for the parent to know that it's going so well that the consultant was looped in and everybody is celebrating in Johnny's success at the school. It makes such a difference. And the other thing is to circle back to the consultant to make sure, was this the right kind of placement? Is it what the consultant expected? It's a great way to make sure that the consultant's vision of what it is that you're doing is correct. Is that student what we expected it to be? Number 10 is to make use of the resources that IECA has. We are able to provide mailing lists. Starting this year, we can provide email lists to schools that want to be in touch with consultants. Our Facebook page, we have a couple thousand people that connect with us on our Facebook page, and every school has the right to post things about what's going on their campus or invitations for consultants to come visit. We have another 1,500 that connect with us on LinkedIn. We can share information to our members. Insights, as I've mentioned, not only goes out to our 1,100 members, but Insights goes to 5,500 people. And in addition to that, and yes, there's opportunities for advertising and sponsorships. Of course, I have to say that. Twitter, we have a couple thousand Twitter followers, and we are constantly retweeting and sharing information with our members about what's going on in schools. It's a great way to reach our consultants. I mentioned coming to conferences, but presenting at conferences is a thing to do. Now, we're not going to let you present a webinar, a session at a conference or a webinar that's about why my school is better than everyone else's. But if you have a school that does something unique, sharing something about the uniqueness that's done, not to sell your school, but to share information about an educational policy or program, that's something that you can do through IECA as well. Our members, almost all, about 90% of our members are connected somehow with us through social media, and so it's a way to reach those people as well. Well, I think I went about 10 minutes longer than I wanted to, and I apologize that I had to start rushing a little bit. But I do want to get to questions, and I'll make the following promise. If there are questions that you've got and you can get me, Karen, that we don't have time for, I will answer them personally for anybody who asks a question. But let's see if we can get some in right now.
Thanks, Mark. I'm going to give everybody a couple minutes to type in any questions that they might have. We kind of answered a number of them as the webinar was progressing. So if anybody at this point has additional questions you'd like to ask Mark about connecting with educational consultants, or ways that the demographics have changed, or specific things that he might be able to help you with, please feel free to type them in at this point. We'll give a few minutes.
I'm going to say, well, people, I hope, are asking questions, and again, I'll answer them personally if we don't have time. Just to circle back on the therapeutic side, it's so important to realize that these days when parents call and they just say something's wrong with my kids, there's some triage done very quickly at the IECA office. Is this a person who's looking for a therapeutic placement? Is this a person who's looking for a traditional boarding school? Is this a person who's looking for an independent day school? Is this a person who's looking for a military academy? You know, there are so many kinds of educational institutions out there. So we work with trying to figure out what it is that the family is looking for, even if they don't know what they're looking for. And that's very often the case. The family has not a clue what they're looking for.
Excellent. Kim Mount asks, how is the emergence and growing interest in online educational programs influencing educational consulting work?
Boy, boy, oh boy. It certainly is. You know, from the most obvious, we have members that are doing online education, lots of them. There are programs that have developed at a number of colleges, online certificate programs in educational consulting. We've developed the curriculum for those. But I think that increasingly consultants are looking at online education as yet one more option that students have. Increasingly, I'm told, members are hearing from kids that are homeschooled, some of which are in a traditional homeschool environment, some of which are using online education to acquire their homeschooling. So all of that is part of the mix, I think, today. And you know, we're beginning to hear some schools and colleges talk about requiring at least one online class in order to graduate. So we increasingly think it's going to be part of the mix. And whether it's the MOOC, the massive online courses that are made available for free by some universities, or it's just sort of in the more traditional realm of online education, we just think it's a critical piece. And it'll be interesting as schools who want to add more advanced coursework especially look at being able to add either independently or add for students doing advanced work some online coursework.
That was a great answer. Thank you so much. I think we're all set then, and we're almost at 4 o'clock, which means that we did a very good job keeping within the time. Thank you so much. So I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar. I want to thank our audience for tuning in, and a special thank you to Mark for providing our attendees with such a helpful presentation. Just a reminder, I will send all registrants a link to the online webinar page where a recording and a PDF of this presentation will be made available likely sometime tomorrow. So you can look for that in your inbox tomorrow afternoon. Thanks again, and have a wonderful day, everyone.
Yep, thank you.